Tick-tock, time to rock. I noticed some of the people here are saying they didn't get notifications. I don't know why that is. For the record, I don't think it's sabotage. I think they're just, when you've got a platform as massive as... Hi, what the heck, man?
You just... I wanted you to hear how annoying your voice is to the rest of us.
You just said 2 minutes ago. Let me turn off all my sounds here. 2 minutes later, the classic blunder. No, it's funny because I did that just a couple of hours ago. I was on someone else's live stream, and then, started hearing myself over again because I had the computer on. All right, well, good evening and good morning and good afternoon to everyone here. I'm guessing it will pick up steam. I'm hoping people are getting the notifications now, at least, that we're live. But we won't know, and whether we are or not, we'll just we'll keep rolling with it. So tonight we are going to look at some clips by a Muslim apologist. This has been a theme in these past live streams that Muslim apologists can just say pretty much anything they want. They can say absolutely anything they want, and it doesn't matter if it's true or false, as long as it's attacking Christianity or defending Islam. Doesn't matter if it has any basis whatsoever in reality. It's just not a criterion. And a Muslim apologist can completely make things up. For some reason, Muslims just don't call him out. If I were to do that, if I were to stand on stage and make up a bunch of things, especially completely outlandish things, I would get tons of messages from people like Anthony and people like Sam and James White and all kinds of other people saying, David, you just spouted a bunch of complete nonsense. What are you doing? These things are false. Go out there and apologize. Correct yourself. That's what would happen. But in Islam, it's just no issue at all. So that's what we'll be covering. With me here is Anthony Rodgers. Now, Anthony, what do you think of our good friend Yusuf Estes?
Oh, Yusuf Estes is a barrel of laughs in one sense. He, as we'll see, makes outlandish claims, but at the same time, it's quite lamentable because, as you said, Muslims just fall all over this guy thinking he's got a lot to offer. And really, when you look at what he has to say about Christianity, you realize he didn't really understand the religion he left. And often, even when speaking about Islam, it seems like he doesn't understand a whole lot about the religion he joined. So he definitely doesn't get high marks in my view. But at the same time, he's relevant to speak about because, as I said, a lot of Muslims really latch onto this guy. His videos often get a high volume of hits. I have no idea why. And so apparently they're impressed by him. And one thing I'd add, since you mentioned Muslims don't call him out on this stuff, the fact that his videos get such high views really says a lot, because with all those views, there has to be somebody in there that knows he's not speaking accurately. And so for no one to say anything, really says a lot about the caliber that these guys hold their apologists to. It seems as if as long as he's speaking against Christianity and for Islam, then it's okay. He can say whatever he wants.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, it is an issue. And I mean, if I said the kinds of things about Islam that Muslim apologists and some of their top apologists say about Christianity, I'd be laughed off stage every time and would not be invited back. But in Islam, just very, very different standards. So we are going to go ahead and get started. There has to be a problem, by the way, with the notification system today. Some people are pointing out that Christian Prince is live right now. I don't think that's really the issue, because we've been live at the same time Christian Prince was live. In fact, we were live last week and we had almost 1,000 people, and Christian Prince was live streaming. So maybe there is an issue. Again, people are saying that they didn't get a notification. So anyway, we'll roll with it. We'll see what happens. All right, so let's go ahead and start off with a video clip by Yusuf Estes. Now, guys, I hope I hope you understand how awesome this is. And we're going to point it out. But this is Yusuf Estes, and the clip is titled something like Catholic woman asks Yusuf Estes about Catholicism or something like this. So that's the context. It's a woman who stands up and asks him if he was a Catholic, and if so, how could he become a Muslim, and so on. And he starts going ahead and answering the question. And in this context, he gives the historical background of the Catholic Church. And it's not what anyone here thinks. It's not what anyone in the world has ever thought. But now there are lots of Muslims who think this because Yusuf Estes went ahead and said it. So let's look. I got 3 clips on Yusuf Estes. It's all from the same part of the same lecture he was giving. And we're going to go ahead and take a look now. All right, here you have Yusuf Estes.
But I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to be honest. This is not for you to, start a debate, but just be honest. Was Jesus a Catholic? And it's not open to debate, so there's no point in opening that up because you know and I know he wasn't. The Catholic Church was in business about 300 years before Jesus was born. It's on their website. Don't go like this. It's on their website. That's where I took it from. The Catholic Church was really started in Rome by Alexander the Great.
Now, Anthony, here we have a couple of claims by Yusuf Estes. Oh, wait, you can't hear the clips, can you?
No, but I was able to catch part of it. I probably missed it a little because of the lag. But...
Well, I will take my headphones off. I will take my headphones off, and then you'll be able to hear it playing on my computer. So right there. Matter of fact, let's go ahead and watch it again because I want it to sink in for everybody. As a matter of fact, I could watch that clip all day on one of these. We should have it. I should make a video called 10 Hours of Yusuf Estes claiming that Alexander the Great started the Catholic Church in Rome 3 centuries before Christ, because that's what he just said. All right, let's watch this one more time, ladies and gentlemen, and see what our good friend Yusuf is claiming.
But I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to be honest. This is not for you to, start a debate, but just be honest. Was Jesus a Catholic? And it's not open to debate, so there's no point in opening that up because you know and I know he wasn't. The Catholic Church was in business about 300 years before Jesus was born. It's on their website. Don't go like this. It's on their website. That's where I took it from. The Catholic Church was really started in Rome by Alexander the Great.
All right, so the claims we have there are... the Catholic Church was founded by Alexander the Great 3 centuries before Christ in Rome, and it's on the website of the Catholic Church. So 4 claims there in just a few seconds. Anthony, you've been studying religion and the history of Christianity for many years. How much did Yusuf Estes get right in his explanation of the historical background of the Catholic Church?
Well, the only thing he got right is that this isn't up for debate. Right? It's not up for debate. He's wrong about everything. And one thing I'd throw in there is he makes the observation that Jesus was not a Catholic. And for Muslims, this apparently means a whole lot more than most Christians would recognize. Muslims want to argue, of course, that everyone was a Muslim, that everybody believed in Islam. And here they're simply playing a game. Obviously, we would say that all the prophets submitted to God, right? And so in that sense, if you want to use the word Muslim, you could, but it doesn't mean the same thing that it does for Muslims, right? It doesn't mean they believed in Muhammad's deity. They certainly weren't expecting a prophet named Muhammad and not a guy who was going to overturn everything God had said to all the prophets. So this is a sort of game that Muslims play, and it also has something to do with their kind of bizarre approach to everything. Allah has to name everything for them, right? Mm-hmm. So, for example, we can't trust the Bible. Where does God call the Bible the Bible? Right? Yeah. Or things like that. Christians don't typically think that way, but it's part of the bizarre world of Islam, where those sorts of things apparently are the be all and end all of the argument. Mm-hmm. But the simple answer to your question is he didn't get anything right.
Okay, so let's get more specific here. You're saying, now you're not a Catholic, so you have no dog in this fight, right?
Right.
All right. And you would be happy to debate a Catholic on whether Catholicism is true. So you have no interest in simply protecting Catholicism here. You're not going to make something up to correct someone on Catholicism.
Nope.
All right. So, given that, did the Catholic Church start 3 centuries before Christ?
No.
It didn't.
No. And here, yeah, I mean, we could even be more specific. I mean, it's clear that when he uses the term Catholic, he means Roman Catholic. Mm-hmm. Catholic was a term that Christians used for a long time. I mean, long before Rome claimed any kind of special prominence or hegemony over all of Christendom. The term Catholic was used simply to refer to all Christians everywhere. The term means universal. But even in that sense, the Catholic Church didn't exist 300 years before Jesus. But it's clear he means Roman Catholic. Mm-hmm. He's using it in the specific sense that it would later come to have for those who are in communion or submission to the Bishop of Rome.
Mm-hmm. Now, wasn't Alexander the Great the founder of the Catholic Church?
No.
You sure?
Yeah, I'm sure. But somebody raised a good point in the comments section. By the way, they said, "Wait a minute! I thought Alexander the Great was a prophet in mm-hmm. Islam." And so let's just run with Yusuf's logic here. If Alexander the Great founded the Catholic Church, obviously that's not how he's using it. He's trying to discredit Catholicism.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm guessing Yusuf must be one of the people who denies Dul Qarnayn being Alexander the Great. Right. By the way, just a little, I think I got a map. I think I got a map here. All right, let's look at a little map of the journey of Alexander the Great. This guy was still very young when he died, but here's what he did during his life. So notice, starts off over all the way on the upper left there. Starts off in Macedonia, then goes across and heads into Asia Minor, down into Egypt, takes care of Egypt, then goes back up, then keeps heading east, all the way over till you start getting to India, then circles back and dies. Now, we don't even have Rome on here because Alexander just traveled east and then he started on his way back. But this is the territory conquered by Alexander the Great. Notice that Rome isn't on here. Why? Because he didn't conquer Rome. He didn't do it. It never happened. And yet, according to Yusuf Estes, Alexander the Great not only went to Rome, he also started a Catholic Church there 3 centuries before Christ. Now, I say this because, matter of fact, let me look this up.
Yeah, and real quick while you're looking that up,
I want to look up how many views this has when he says something ridiculous like this.
Yeah, some people are filing in here and didn't see the clip. For those that are just coming in, we played a clip of Yusuf Estes in one of his.
Oh, we'll play it again. We'll play it again because this is awesome stuff.
Yeah. So basically, though, Yusuf Estes claims that the Catholic Church was started 300 years before Christ was born by Alexander the Great in Rome. All
right, I want to see how many views this has. This has 2.4 million views. And it's not 2.4 million people watching it and saying how dumb it is and how silly it is. It's It's Muslims watching this and cheering and praising Allah for the greatness of Yusuf Estes in refuting Catholicism. And this is what he's saying. The Catholic Church, founded in Rome by Alexander the Great, 3 centuries before Christ. So for some of the people who, we've got some other clips to go on to, but the clip we played is only like 30 seconds, 37 seconds, something like that. So we'll go ahead and play that again one more time, last time here for this one. But here is the wisdom of Yusuf Estes.
But I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to be honest. This is not for you to, start a debate, but just be honest. Was Jesus a Catholic? And it's not open to debate, so there's no point in opening that up because you know and I know he wasn't. The Catholic Church was in business about 300 years before Jesus was born. It's on their website. Don't go like this. It's on their website. That's where I took it from. The Catholic Church was really started in Rome by Alexander the Great.
Now, notice there, he's spouting some complete nonsense, obviously. And the woman is shaking her head no. And then he rebukes her for it. Don't shake your head no. I got this from their website. So according to Yusuf Estes, if you go to the website of, I don't know what he's claiming it was on, the Vatican or the CatholicChurch.org or something like that, that if you go there, you've got Catholics, Catholic scholars, insisting that, yes, our church was founded 3 centuries before Christ by Alexander the Great in Rome. And I would just invite any fans of Yusuf Estes to go ahead and give us that link. And I guess now Anthony, the claim will be, oh no, they took it down. They took down the proof that Alexander the Great founded the Catholic Church in Rome 3 centuries before Christ, because they realized Yusuf Estes was really sending them some new traffic and using their website to expose them. Now, the reason I find this amazing, by the way, is not only does he make up everything he just said, right? When someone doesn't believe him, he'll, no, it's there. And why this really bothers me is, especially if you're dealing with Muslims, you're talking 99-point-something% of your listeners. In other words, if you talk about those 2.4 million viewers who watched this clip, you're talking probably 99.9999% of people will never actually bother to go look that up. Why? Well, because they trust Yusuf Estes. They trust him, right? So when he says it, they think, oh, it's good. Then when he really says, no, it's on their website, they think it's really on the website that he's just proven his case. And this seems to be how Muslim apologists think in general. It's, hey, I can make something up on stage. I can just completely make something up because there are only 1 or 2 people who are actually going to go look this up. And who cares? Who cares if 1 or 2 people know I'm a liar and making things up if I just convinced 99-point-something% of my listeners that Christianity is really messed up or that Islam is so obviously true in what I made up. And it just seems to be a pure cost benefits analysis here that if I lie over and over again, I can build a massive mob who are going to agree with me. And that mob is eventually big enough that they can shout down anyone who actually looks things up and realizes I'm just spouting complete nonsense. What do you think?
Yeah, and I think statistically the number of people who figure out later that they were duped once they've committed themselves to Islam, if they're persuaded by his reasoning, they won't then turn around and leave Islam. Some will, but a number of people will remain. It reminds me of an old Columbo episode where Columbo is going back and he's looking at the evidence for a particular murder, and it seems to point to a particular individual who committed a murder a decade earlier, and the police chief is especially bothered by it because he's the one who convicted a guy. He caught him, convicted a guy on that earlier murder. And so if Colombo's right that this murder that he's investigating 10 years later is by someone else, then it would undermine the very case that made the police chief, that put him into prominence and got him his position. Now, the police chief wasn't going to lose his job per se, but he would lose some of his credibility. But my point is simply, likewise, there will be a number of people persuaded by his arguments that will continue to cling to Islam, even though their original reasons have now been debunked. Mm-hmm. And so, like you said, it's somewhat diabolical, right? I don't know how much he's thinking ahead as far as that goes, but
no, and they're just so. Best case scenario, he just doesn't know what he's talking about and just isn't very careful. Worst case scenario, he's actually trying to make stuff up. But either way, there's just not a lot of incentive in Islam to speak accurately. It doesn't get you in trouble. You can make stuff up all day long as you're making things up in the right direction, i.e., to attack Christianity or to defend Islam. Anything goes, right? And yeah, again, 2.4 million people. People are pointing out some of the issues here. You got 2.4 million people. So what? So what if a couple realize that you're a complete liar? You probably won more than that in converts just by the stuff you're making up, right? Because he went on this long response to the question, where he just blasted the Catholic Church and talked about its origins. And if you're a Catholic watching and you have no clue what he's talking about and don't realize how stupid everything he's saying really is, you'd think, wow, I need to convert to Islam. I need to go ahead and convert to Islam based on what this man just said, not realizing he's spouting total nonsense. So just imagine, let's suppose 50 people converted after, because you're talking about 2.4 million people. That's a lot of people. And probably a lot of Muslims were sending this to their Catholic friends and so on. So some of those Catholics watch that and go, this is the most ridiculous nonsense ever. Some people look at that and go, wow, I never heard any of this. My priests are covering this stuff up. I need to convert. And so a couple people find out you're a liar, but a lot of people convert based on the lies. And that always seems to be the Islamic mathematics, right? It's not about telling the truth. It's not about integrity. It's about whoever can build the biggest mob by any means necessary. That's what really matters. And that's just that tells you something about the spirit of this religion. All right, let's look at a couple comments here. From Ants On, scamming the uneducated is evil. Well, is it just me, Anthony, or is that what every Muslim apologist does nowadays?
Yeah. And I'm not sure. I mean, I saw the video before. I can't remember what the crowd reveals about where this is being done. Uh-huh. Obviously, Muslim speaking anywhere can expect some people not to be well informed or not even altogether serious about looking into the evidence for what he's claiming. So he's always going to pick up a number of stragglers. But that increases depending on where you're at, right? Mm-hmm. Certain parts of the world, you're going to have people who are less educated or have less access to historical information, or even live in countries where certain things are access is barred to them. And so my guess is that particular lecture was spoken to a crowd of people that are less likely to be in a position to quickly and easily falsify what he's saying, even as easy as it is. But I'm not certain of that. But I know they do that routinely, mm-hmm. right? Certainly Zakir Naik likes doing that.
Yep. Loris K here. Isn't Yusuf supposedly a Christian convert to Islam? And this is one of the reasons this is very interesting, right? Because Anthony, how has he portrayed himself over the years as far as his background?
Yeah, often he'll simply say that he was a Christian minister and leave that undefined.
Now, however, and by the way, notice that, because that seems to be the most common way for these some Christian background Muslim speakers like Yusuf Evans and Yusuf Estes and so on, they'll describe themselves as former Christian minister, knowing that you could justify that by anything, right? Minister means like servant, right? So hey, I was a minister. I was a minister of Christianity. I preached Christianity in some way. I believed in Christianity in some way. I played some role. But they know that their listeners are thinking of minister in some official capacity, like a priest or a pastor, because almost every time, which is almost every day, that I get comments from Muslims about Yusuf Estes, it's, you would never say this if Yusuf Estes were here. He would destroy you. He was a Christian priest and a scholar of Christianity, and he converted. And you just get sick of correcting these guys. What in the world are you talking about? So go ahead and tell us a little more about Yusuf's what we know about Yusuf and how he represents himself.
Yeah, quickly, let me throw in here. You mentioned Yusuf Evans. I listened to Yusuf Evans for years give his testimony, and I listened to his testimony probably 5 or 6 times. And the reason I did that was because each time he would add a detail that I didn't hear before. Mm-hmm. But one of the things I kept hearing him say was that he was raised in a very conservative Christian environment. He went to church all the time. He went Wednesdays and Sundays, twice on Sundays, right, morning and evening. He really played up his level of involvement in the church, and so therefore his knowledge and how he became a youth minister and that sort of thing. And I was shocked. I was shocked when he finally said where that was that he was born and raised. He said he was born and raised in Greenville, South Carolina. And I was shocked by that because that's where I live, right? And he mentioned in a lot of these shows that he went to a local Christian university to ask questions when he was doubting Christianity, and they couldn't give him answers. And he used to say he went to the textual criticism department of a particular university and they couldn't answer him. And then he finally mentioned that it was Bob Jones University. And I go there all the time to use their library. They have a great library. And so I went there and I asked them about their textual criticism department. And they said, "What are you talking about? We don't have a textual criticism department." Now, it's not as if they don't deal with textual issues, but my point is there's no such thing as a text criticism department. There's no textual critic there on staff or what have you. So these guys just, seem to have no shame. They just say whatever they will.
But before you go on the issue of Yusuf, we might have to go through his testimony at some point, because I did the math once. Based on, because every once in a while he would give a bit of a timeline, right? So he would say, I was this old and I did this and so on. At one point, I forget the details, so we'll have to clarify exactly what the time frame was at some point in the future if we go through his testimony. But I just started jotting down notes. I was like, okay, so he said he was this old at this time and this old at this time, and then he went and did this, and I ended up with something like where he claimed that he studied all of the world's religions, and so he went and said that he reads really fast, and so he studied all of the world's religions, and somehow he didn't get to Islam until he had studied all of the world's religions. And I ended up with, as far as his time frame went, that he studied all of the world's religions within a couple of months when he was like 16 years old or something like that. And it's just amazing that Muslims will then put him forward as this expert on religions. When, if you listen to what he says about Christianity, he clearly had no clue what he's talking about. And if he's that sloppy in this religion that he supposedly spent years studying and investigating and going to church, I can only imagine how sloppy he is on the other religions that he somehow mastered within the space of a few months. So, yeah, interesting fellow. But what do we have with Yusuf here?
Yeah, so Yusuf will often just say he was a minister, but sometimes he'll get more specific when it's relevant to, the story or what have you. But he was actually a music guy. And I know in some churches the music guy will be called a music minister or something like that. So it's not as if the term can't be used that way. It's just that it's misleading. When most people hear the term minister, they do think of somebody who was equipped and not self-appointed. He has some, formal standing in the Christian church. and therefore can speak with some kind of authority. He's at least informed, but it's clear that his background didn't involve any real formal education. And when you hear him talk, I mean, I've heard people say often that they've learned more about the religion they left after they left it, because since they left, they went back and studied it more or something like that. But I can't believe that Yusuf Estes at this point still thinks what he does about Christianity or Catholicism, right? I mean, there's just no excuse for that. How does anybody who was a Christian think that the Catholic Church was started 300 years before Christ? And how does anybody who's now making a name for himself, going around attacking Christianity, still holding that idea? You'd think at least by that point he had time to, figure something out. But
yeah. And so the idea here is, if he's this bad now on the origins of Christianity, and he's been lecturing on it for years and giving his testimony for years and educating people on Christianity for years, treated as an expert by Muslims for years on this topic, if he's that bad now, what do you think his knowledge was when he was going to church as a Christian? I would say probably worse than nothing. That would be my guess. And so it just is interesting that they keep, I would say, deliberately giving the impression that they were like pastors or scholars or priests or something like this. I see it over and over again. And that's why, it's the Muslims who are convinced that these guys were like religious scholars or something like that, because they keep telling me, this guy was a pastor, this guy was a priest. And I say, no, he wasn't. Yes, he was. No, he wasn't. So interesting stuff here. Dennis here says the comments on that video are funnier. They actually believe it. I know, that was my point. The comment section there is filled. It's like one of the cat videos, right? A cat will not walk on the Quran, and it'll get millions of views. And the comment section is filled with Allahu Akbar. This proves that Islam is true. Same thing here with the video by Yusuf. What a great refutation of Christianity. What a great refutation of Catholicism. May this woman convert after this great response. Disturbing stuff. We had a question.
And then you get the Muslims, you need to debate Yusuf Estes.
Yeah.
But, well, there's a reason Yusuf Estes doesn't debate, right?
Yeah.
I think you can find online one debate, and it wasn't really much of a debate. Just the way it was set up, it was designed, I think, in many ways to favor him and not really put him under the microscope. But yeah, he's an apologist as long as nobody debates him.
Yeah, you would if you're going to take this route, namely, hey, I'm just going to make things up and I don't really care because I'll always be deceiving the vast majority of the Muslim listeners, and those who figure it out, who cares? If my number of fans is constantly growing, and the critics can be dismissed because they're statistically insignificant, just keep up this method. And that's the method that most Muslim apologists use. And again, what does this tell us about this religion? We have a question about Ijaz here, but it's actually kind of relevant. Anthony Rodgers, I listened to your debate with Ijaz Ahmed yesterday. Do you think he's really studied any logic? It seems more likely that he memorized the names of a lot of fallacies to impress his followers. And this would go back to what we are saying right now, right? It's not about being accurate or being truthful. It's about sounding like you know what you're talking about, even when you're spouting complete nonsense. And I have to say, I'm not aware of a Muslim apologist who uses logical fallacies, like pointing out logical fallacies, accurately. Lots of Muslim, it's become very popular in recent years for a Muslim apologist to start spouting out logical fallacies. And I think they actually got that from us, because I used to do that in the debates. I would say, you're committing this fallacy. Oh, you've committed this fallacy, and so on. I think they jumped on that bandwagon. The difference, ladies and gentlemen, is I spent years studying philosophy and taking logic courses and teaching logic, so I know how to use them. These guys hear the names, as you just pointed out, and they say it, but it's clear they don't know what they're talking about. They don't know how to apply them. And in logic classes, how this works is you learn what the fallacy is, and in a chapter of a book, you'll learn 4 or 5 fallacies, and then you'll have to actually do your homework, where you go through all of these examples, and you have to figure out if there's a logical fallacy there, and then you have to name the fallacy, or you have to say there's no fallacy. And you go through example after example after example after example of this until you can spot a logical fallacy, and you can say, here's what the logical fallacy is. These guys don't. It's more like, hey, I want to sound cool when I'm debating, so let me learn a couple of names, but without getting the practice of spotting them, they don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah. When I think of somebody like Ijaz, and that I think he's referring to my debate with Ijaz, which was my first debate. And every time I think about that, it reminds me of something I used to earlier in my life. I used to spend a lot of time practicing martial arts and stuff like that. And one of the things that was interesting was it was often more difficult to deal with somebody who was a lower belt, especially a new person, than somebody who actually knew how to fight. Right? Not to say that a person with a higher ranking couldn't handle them, but it was always a matter of, you got to get your bearings a little bit with this person who's unorganized, unstructured, doesn't really know how to throw a punch, so it could come from any weird, wild angle, right? And so often those people can be a little bit more tricky to deal with. The thing with Ijaz that I've noticed over the years is that, yeah, he would use terms in just completely bizarre ways, and you'd be scratching your head for a while wondering what in the world he's even saying. Mm-hmm. And he's really convinced that he's saying something accurately, and other people are sort of mesmerized, right? They're thinking, oh gosh, he just sounds like he knows what he's talking about, and you're over there thinking, I've never heard these words used in this way ever, right? And once you get your bearings, then you can handle it. But the problem is, it's kind of like whack-a-mole. With Ijaz, every new thing you hear from him, he's brought up some other weird way of expressing himself, and using logical fallacies that you've never seen before in your life. And so for somebody who's studied those issues, sometimes you can even sit there and think, do I not know what that term means? Because he seems pretty confident, but I don't recognize what he's talking about. And you realize, no, he just doesn't know what he's talking about, right? And actually, it was funny the other day. I was watching David and Sam talk about Ijaz's attempt to defend Allah praying and so forth.
Someone just brought that up. Said, remember when Ijaz talked about relational verbs, right?
Yeah.
He's using terms that have to do with English grammar in the same way he uses logical fallacies. Just say it. A bunch of the listeners are going to think he knows what he's talking about. So who cares about the few that know he's just spouting nonsense?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, finish what you're saying. I just wanted to toss that in there to show.
That was basically my point. He does that all the time.
Yeah.
And if you hear that, off the cuff, you're kind of like, what's going on here? What did I just hear? And, maybe after a few minutes, you're like, okay, he just doesn't know what he's talking about. But in a short discussion, it can throw you off a little bit, because you're still over there wondering, did I just completely miss his point, or does he not really have a point and just wants to sound like he does?
Mm-hmm. Here, someone's asking here, Act 17, did you take philosophy classes? Yeah. Oh, I took some philosophy classes. Yeah. Yes. So, my undergraduate degrees were in biology and philosophy. The philosophy was with an emphasis in religious studies. Then I got a Master of Arts in philosophy, an MPhil in philosophy, and then a PhD in philosophy. So, yeah, I took a lot of classes and eventually taught philosophy for a while. I was teaching philosophy of human nature and philosophical ethics. So that's my background in philosophy. All right, well, let's go ahead and check out this next clip. Let's see if Yusuf is able to redeem himself, although he's not aware that he needs any redeeming, since everything he says is apparently correct in the eyes of his audience. But let's see if he shares a bit more information that is accurate with this one.
It's on their website. Don't go like this. It's on their website. That's where I took it from. The Catholic Church was really started in Rome by Alexander the Great. Do you know what the word Catholic means? It means universal. It was the universal church for the Roman Empire. If you didn't join it, you could not be a Roman citizen. And it was opposed to the teachings of Judaism and opposed to the teachings of the early Christians for more than 200 and some years. And they were diametrically opposed to each other to the extent that it was the Romans killing the early Christians.
No, wait a minute. Hold on. Guys, keep this in mind as we watch this again, because keep in mind his Yusuf's timeline. The Catholic Church was founded 3 centuries before Christ in Rome. That's what he said, right, Anthony?
Yep.
Okay. And then I think he just said, which is why I want to watch this again for me. I think he just said that it was opposed to the teachings of Judaism and the Christian teaching for more than 2 centuries. So wait a minute. So now you had other at least another denomination of Christianity, another sect of Christianity that's around that the Catholic Church is opposing. All of this before Christ, right? BC. You getting this?
Now I have a question. Just playing Muslim for a moment. Where is it referred to as the Catholic Church, right? Where's that phrase used? Mm-hmm. And of course I'm here referring to the fact that Muslims love to say, where does he use the term Bible? Where does he use the word Trinity? Where did God name them Christians, right? So where is this phrase used? In fact, what expectation would there be that this phrase would be used anyways? Was the phrase Catholic Church even in? I'm just trying to put this together from a Muslim.
There must be. Notice what he would need in order to defend himself here. One, he would need records of Alexander the Great traveling to Rome, founding a church there. So that church being called the Catholic Church, and he points out it means universal. So he would need them using this term because he's the one drawing attention to this.
Now, why would they be calling themselves? The whole point of the term Catholic coming to be used for Christians was precisely because the gospel was going forth into all the world, right? The apostles are going into all nations as Jesus instructed them to proclaim the gospel to every man. And so that's where the term Catholic comes to be used, right? It encompasses people from every nation and every tongue. There's just no stretch of the imagination why that term would be used by Rome, which, by the way, was Rome in existence 300 years before Christ.
Certainly not Rome as we know it.
Right. So, I'm thinking, was it a? You don't have the Roman system and the religion, whatever it's being. Actually, it was a hodgepodge, right? But anyways, you don't have this concept of our religion is spread throughout the world, right? Mm-hmm. So that we would call it Catholic or universal. That it's just not even there, and even in terms of its content.
Yeah,
not just the terminology.
Hey, check this out. It seems a Muslim friend here gets the point. He says, "How do you get a sect of Christianity before the birth of Jesus, peace be upon him? That sounds ridiculous."
Yeah, and look at Salmon Player. He didn't even get my point. He says Anthony Rodgers just admitted that people made up the word Catholic. You're missing the point, Salmon Player. We don't hold the artificial view that God needs to name everything for us, right? We can make labels for things that are true, that are real, right? For example, the sun was there before it was named the sun, right? Mm-hmm. Certainly, the Lord knew what it was and so forth. But my point is simply that something isn't false or untrue simply because the name that's given to it later is a later designation. That's just a very bizarre way of thinking, and it's only something that fascinates Muslims. It's not a criteria that we use. The word Catholic means universal, and it refers to Christians spread throughout the world.
Yeah. So did you catch that, Salmon Player? There's a word that means universal, and Catholics at some point said, "This is what we want to name our church. This is the one Catholic church, the universal church." So they used a language, right? Now, according to your apologist here, it was actually Alexander the Great that founded that church centuries before Christ. And the Muslim here gets it. How do you get a sect of Christianity before the birth of Jesus? That sounds ridiculous. Now, how is it that this Muslim can see that, right? But that millions of people can watch Yusuf Estes and not realize, hey, he's being totally, totally ridiculous here. But even if you didn't know anything, it's not just one sect, it's multiple sects, because we'll go back and watch it now. According to Yusuf Estes, Catholic Church started 3 centuries before Christ in Rome and was against the teachings of Judaism and the teachings of Christianity for 2 centuries. Hold on. Let's see that. I actually want to verify it. I'm thinking I must have misheard him say that, because there's no way to reconcile these things now. All right. Let's see.
It's on their website. Don't go like this. It's on their website. That's where I took it from. The Catholic Church was really started in Rome by Alexander the Great. Do you know what the word Catholic means? It means universal. It was the universal church for the Roman Empire. If you didn't join it, you could not be a Roman citizen. And it was opposed to the teachings of Judaism and opposed to the teachings of the early Christians for more than 200 and some years. And they were diametrically opposed to each other to the extent that it was the Romans killing the early Christians.
Notice, by the way, that he also said you couldn't be a Roman citizen unless you joined the Catholic Church. That must mean that Paul, since he was a Roman citizen, was a Catholic, right?
Yeah, and well, it would mean, you had tons of people. You had Jews who were Roman citizens.
Right.
You had tons of pagans who were Roman citizens. So according to Yusuf Estes, all those people who were Roman citizens were part of the Catholic Church, which was founded by Alexander the Great 3 centuries before Christ. Now, Anthony, on a scale of 1 to 10, how bad is this here?
It's not on the scale.
Yusuf is completely off the scale here in terms of his inaccuracy. What's amazing is this is one of the main Muslim apologists out there, right? He's up there with Zakir Naik in terms of popularity. He's right up there with Zakir Naik. And this reminds me of remember that clip Nabil did, like 25 errors in 5 minutes.
Oh yeah,
yeah, yeah. Nabil had a medical doctorate, and so he was fascinated to go through just 5 minutes of one of Zakir Naik's biology lessons, and Nabil pointed out 25 mistakes that Zakir Naik made in 5 minutes. And it just doesn't bother Muslims at all. It doesn't bother. It obviously has bothered at least one Muslim in the comment section. But you, my friend, are a minority, right? Even if you point these things out to Muslims, they generally just do not care about how inaccurate their guys are. And this is just some sad stuff. We have one more clip. Did you want to answer any comments before we jump on the next clip?
I don't think I see any. I don't know if Salmon Player chimed back in.
Oh, I'm sure he did, and I haven't looked at it yet, but I can almost guarantee that whatever you said, he misrepresented it.
Well, one thing about it, it just occurs to me is, Muslims make much of the fact that in Islam, It's just like, Muslims think Islam's superior because Allah taught them how to go to the bathroom, right? Whereas in Christianity, God created us in his image and doesn't think we're dolts. And so, certain things, we can learn through our parents and in life. Well, for Muslims, everything needs to be named by Allah. But notice Allah didn't name the religion he created for Muhammad, according to the Muslim view. He didn't name it Islam originally. It was later that he says, I've, named your religion Islam. And so what? Islam wasn't true before that. It's just a very strange way of thinking that because Allah told him how to refer to everything, that people can't use, shorthand expressions, for stuff, right? I mean, we do it all the time. Imagine if we tried to live by this, where we can't use any terms to summarize things. We always have to spell it out unless we've been given a special. It's just a very bizarre way of thinking.
Mm-hmm. All right. Someone asked over here, play that video of Estes again, David, please. So I don't know if you just want to see it again, but there are people who are constantly trickling in, and the clips are actually short. So before we go on to the third clip, let's play those other two clips again. They're only 30-some seconds long each, so let's go ahead and take a peek at these one more time so everyone can understand. Again, this is one of the most popular Muslim apologists in the world. He is portrayed as an expert in Christian-Muslim dialogue and in Christianity. And if you look at the things he's saying, this is absolutely amazing. So we'll play the first clip where he explained, for those of you who weren't here, we'll play the first clip again where he explains the origins of the Catholic Church.
But I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to be honest. This is not for you to, start a debate, but just be honest. Was Jesus a Catholic? And it's not open to debate, so there's no point in opening that up because you know and I know he wasn't. The Catholic Church was in business about 300 years before Jesus was born. It's on their website. Don't go like this. It's on their website. That's where I took it from. The Catholic Church was really started in Rome by Alexander the Great.
All right, so for those of you who are just tuning in and don't know what we're watching a video by Yusuf Estes. He was explaining the origins of the Catholic Church. He just said, you heard him say that the Catholic Church was founded in Rome by Alexander the Great 3 centuries before Christ, and it's on the website of the Catholic Church. So just to clarify, Alexander the Great didn't go to Rome. He didn't start any Catholic Church there. There was no Catholic Church 3 centuries before Christ, and there is no Catholic Church website that acknowledges the things that Yusuf Estes just said. If he wants to say, oh, but they took down those articles after I started using them, well, great. That's what Internet Archive is for. You can go back and find these wonderful articles that say all of the things that you've just claimed. So that's one that we wanted to watch. Anthony, you want to add anything before we watch the second clip just for review?
Well, real quick, Salmon Player, as usual, not paying attention. He said, guys, he said that Islam isn't in the Quran. Read my scripture perfectly. Rodgers read 319. I didn't say.
When did you say that?
Well, I said it in the same place that Yusuf Estes got his information on the origin of the Catholic Church, I guess. It doesn't exist, Salmon Player. That's not what I said. What I said is that it's Muslims who hold the artificial and extremely bizarre idea that if a term is not specifically given by God to designate something, then that thing isn't true, didn't exist, isn't real, or what have you. If I want to call Islam Mohammedanism, which I think is a more appropriate label for it, just because Allah didn't use that term in the Quran doesn't mean that what I'm referring to isn't there, right? We can use nicknames for things. There are other ways to refer to things. It's just a really weird idea that, you guys do it all the time, in fact, right? Mm-hmm. Don't Muslims, they refer to, there are various schools of fiqh, right? They refer to the Hanafi, Hanbali, Shafi'i, all these different schools. Where did Allah give you those names? Where does Allah use those names in the Quran? Where does Allah use those names in the Hadith? Where do you find bila khayf in the Hadith? All these terms are terms that you guys use to label things, which may or may not be true, but it's not true or false based on whether or not the term is used, right? Terms are there to help us refer to things. They're handy catchphrases that allow us to say a lot in a short space. So it's your artificial idea that a term has to be used in order for something that it refers to be true or real. That's not our view. I'm telling you that's
I would regard that as absolutely ridiculous, right? That's something that humans have been doing for a long, long time. We take something and we realize we have some concept here, and we have to talk about that concept. And so since we have this concept that we need to talk about, let's apply a word to it so we all know what we're talking about. And according to Salmon Player, who's clearly been watching Muslim apologists for a long time, no, he sees a massive problem with that. And yes, God needs to tell us every word that we're going to use, or we can never talk about anything else. Very, very interesting. Now, notice we have Gregorian here. He says, wait, what? He actually did mean Alexander the Great and not Constantine? Wow. So apparently Gregorian here thought, he's saying Alexander the Great, but he really means Constantine. No, he means Alexander the Great. That's why it's 3 centuries before Christ. And as far as Constantine, it's clear he's not confusing the two, because he's about to talk about Constantine. So he's about to tell everyone about Constantine. He's about to educate the world on Constantine. But let's go ahead and review that second clip just for the people who came in later. Yusuf Estes telling us more about the origin of the Catholic Church.
It's on their website. Don't go like this. It's on their website. That's where I took it from. The Catholic Church was really started in Rome by Alexander the Great. Do you know what the word Catholic means? It means universal. It was the universal church for the Roman Empire. If you didn't join it, you could not be a Roman citizen. And it was opposed to the teachings of Judaism and opposed to the teachings of the early Christians for more than 200 and some years. And they were diametrically opposed to each other to the extent that it was the Romans killing the early Christians.
No. So did you get that? So now it was the Romans, but he's specifically referring to the Catholic Church, because you couldn't be a Roman citizen unless you were part of this Catholic universal church started by Alexander the Great 3 centuries before Christ, and for 200 and some years it was opposed to the teachings of Christianity and of Judaism, to the extent that the Romans were then killing the early Christians.
Yeah, notice also that he said that you had to join this Catholic religion to be a Roman citizen, and this religion was opposed to Judaism and Christianity. But even when the Jews and Rome do come into contact, Judaism becomes a religio licita, right? It was a legal religion. The Jews were allowed to practice their religion. They didn't have to forsake it, as some other conquering nations would force people to do, right? And the whole issue for the early Christians was, at first, they are considered part of Judaism. Mm-hmm. And so the Jews and the Judaizers are trying to say, no, they're not part of us, because they want to subject them to Roman persecution, right? So, I mean, just an incredible amount of ignorance here. The Jews were not, in fact, opposed in terms of their, I mean, obviously the Romans didn't agree with their religion, but they were a legal religion, and the early Christians were often in the position of trying to say, no, we are Jews, we are Jewish. And, the conflict was always on the part of the Judaizers trying to say, no, these guys, or the Jews, not just the Judaizers, but the Jews trying to say, no, these people have abandoned Judaism and are representing an entirely different religion.
Mm-hmm. And here you have, this man must have read this from The Onion. That's because he's claiming to get this off. It's on the website. It's on the Catholic Church's website, The Onion.
Yeah. Might have to send this off to the Babylon Bee. Where Aladdin asked us a question here. Where is that at? He said he asked us the question. There it is. Who is superior? The God who killed Jesus on the cross in barbaric way in the name of love, or the God who saved him from being tortured in the name of love?
So they're two different gods there. All right, are you ready to renounce Christianity?
You put it on the screen there? Yeah, there it is. Yeah. So obviously Aladdin is beginning with the assumption that man is not sinful, or sin is not so bad as to deserve punishment, or Allah or God is not so holy as to necessarily have to punish it. But on the assumption that sin really is sin, that God really is holy, and that man really deserves to be punished, then yes, the God who is loving is the God who sent his own son, who gave up his one and only son, his well-beloved son, on behalf of sinners. This is why the Apostle Paul in Romans 8 could say, how can he, not freely give us all things if he did not even spare his own son, but gave him up for us all? His whole point is that Christ, as the special object of God's eternal love and delight, having given him up, it guarantees that he'll forgive our sins and with him freely give us all things, right? Eternal glory and immortality and the joy of communing with him forever. Now Allah, on the other hand, no, he's not loving at all, because he in Islam, even if you put aside all those things, right? Allah, what has Allah done to save anyone, right? He certainly, he says that he sends prophets, but these prophets do what? Muhammad. It seems to me that Muhammad only makes matters more difficult for Muslims, really. Mm-hmm. Right. Muhammad is supposed to be the perfect pattern of conduct, but he ends up leading them into sin. I don't know how Allah appears as an object of love in the Quran. Mm-hmm. As a source of love. It's always meritorious. That's not really what love is.
And we'd have to reject his understanding of what happened here, because even his own apologists, like Shabir Ali, acknowledged that Jesus was tortured on the cross. Mm-hmm. And Zakir Naik assumes that in his debates, right? He takes it for granted. He tries to argue that Jesus somehow survived the crucifixion. So even Muslim apologists now are agreeing that they can't really defend the Islamic picture.
Well, yeah, and also, what about the most the predominant view among Muslims is the substitution theory, yep. Right? So how loving is that? Somebody who, somebody else is being thrown on the cross for Jesus. In fact, they make the Jesus that they believe in look cowardly, really, right? Somebody else is dying when he's the one they're after, right? But he's running off somewhere else while somebody else, one of his followers, is dying instead. So they not only don't end up with a God of love who's willing to give his own son on behalf of sinners, but now they end up with a cowardly so-called prophet, right? And of course, we're not speaking here about the Christ of history, the Christ of the Bible. We're talking about the fictitious Christ of the Islamic faith. That Christ ends up being a cowardly individual, and Allah ends up being just a colossal deceiver. In fact, that's, isn't that the heart of the matter, that Allah is here engaging in that act which he claims to be the greatest at, right? He's the best of deceivers. Surah 354 and 830. Yeah.
Now, everyone, just to put all of this together here. So Aladdin, as usual, wants to mock Christianity by mocking the God who, according to the Bible, was willing himself to enter creation to die for our sins. His religion encourages him to mock this view. but he apparently finds it difficult to describe a God who would do that, a God who would whose justice is perfect, so all sin must be punished, but who's so loving that he'll do whatever it takes to satisfy that justice for us. And so it's a very different kind of God from the one you have in Islam, where a God can just sweep sins under the rug, or he can just punish other people for your sins. That's what you have in Islam. So the God who loved us so much that he entered creation to lay down the life that he had taken on for us, that's what Al-Din is mocking. And instead, we're supposed to believe in the God of Islam, who will punish random people, random Christians and Jews, for the sins of Muslims. This is according to your own prophet, Muslims. Muhammad declared that Allah will punish Jews and Christians for the sins of Muslims. If Muslims have sins as heavy as a mountain, so Allah can't just sweep those sins under the rug. Their sins are too big. Don't worry about it, because Allah will take that mountain of sins, put it on Jews and Christians and Jews will be punished in hell for all eternity for your Muslim sins, right? That's what your prophet says. So that's the God that Al-Din is saying we should believe in. But as Anthony pointed out, look, there's only two options here, right? You have many Muslim apologists who now claim that Jesus was actually crucified, he just didn't die. If that's the case, then he was tortured, right? He was tortured exactly as our records of Roman crucifixion would say he was tortured. So, but there's no point to it, right? In Christianity, there's a point to it. In Islam, God just said, okay, you know what would be nice? Having Jesus tortured over and over again. I'll just rescue him later after he goes through the torture. So that's a superior view, according to Al-Din's apologists. Or you've got the classic Muslim response, which is that Jesus wasn't crucified. Instead, Jesus ran away. And then Allah took someone else. This other person was tortured. God made sure this other person was tortured by the people who wanted to kill Jesus. And then Allah tricked everyone down through the centuries into believing that Jesus died on the cross, right? So why do Christians today believe that Jesus died on the cross? Because Allah tricked everyone by miraculously disguising someone else. So Al-Din's response here is, don't believe in that God who loves you so much that he took the penalty for your sins. Instead, believe in a God who would never do that because he doesn't like people that much, who isn't just enough to need to punish all sins, but is just enough to have to punish major sins. And so don't worry, he'll put those sins on someone else and punish someone else for your sins. And then he's going to trick and deceive people into believing that he did something that he didn't, deceiving literally billions of people over the past 2,000 years. Allah has deceived literally billions of people, thus corrupting the very message that he sent Jesus with. So he sent Jesus with the gospel, but then he corrupted it himself by tricking them into believing that Jesus died on the cross. So Muslims are dealing with a cosmic deceiver, and Al-Din is insisting, no, that's the God you should all believe in. And man, when you combine that awesome defense of Islam with the brilliant arguments we're getting from Yusuf Estes about the origin of the Catholic Church, I don't know how everyone is not converting right now. What do you think, Anthony?
Yeah, they just keep going. Al-Din doesn't seem to get it in the comment section.
That's a shocker. No. Notice that's the other impact that their apologists have on them. They just somehow destroy their ability to think logically about anything. It gets sucked right out of them by years of Islamic apologetics.
Yeah, and they don't realize when they try to attack Christianity, they end up undermining their own beliefs. Right? Salmon Player in defense says, yeah, Jesus is God. He lets people sin and then dies for mankind's sins. Now he's saying that in mockery, right? That's just absurd. That Jesus, who's God, would let people sin and then provide salvation for them. Well, Islam may not have the same concept of salvation that we have, but isn't that the same basic idea, right? Didn't Allah let people sin? People sinned. If you're saying Allah didn't let it happen, then it must have happened contrary to his best efforts to stop it. But if Allah's sovereign, then he should have been able to stop it, right? Mm-hmm. But apparently he in his sovereignty allowed people to sin. So you have to grant that because people are in fact sinning. right? And you believe that there's a way of salvation in Islam, even though it's not the Christian way. So I'm really not understanding how you think this is a specific criticism of Christianity. This is if the argument is sound, it cuts both ways, right? It equally cuts against Islam. But happily, the argument isn't sound. It's not a good argument. Okay. Yeah. God created mankind. Mankind, in the exercise of his will, sinned against God, is deserving of his just wrath and displeasure. And as, he either provides salvation or he doesn't, right? In Christianity, he has provided salvation. And the only way that God could provide salvation while at the same time being just is if that salvation is exactly what Christians say it is, right? Christ coming into the world and suffering and dying in the place of sinners. Mm-hmm. The Islamic system isn't just. You either have man's sin simply being ignored or swept under the rug, or or as you pointed out, right, the Islamic concept that Jews and Christians are going to bear the burden of Muslims and be cast into hell for them. Here you have sinful. Now the Quran says that no bearer of burden can bear the burden of another, right? No person who's a sinner, in other words, can take another person's sin. But Muhammad, in opposition to that, taught that Allah would be casting Jews and Christians into hell for the sins of Muslims.
Well, the Quran actually contradicts itself on that point. You have the
right.
No bearer of burden can bear the burden of another, but you have other passages where they will bear their own burdens and the burdens of others. So
yeah,
so you can go either way you want there.
Right. Only in Christianity do you have a Savior who didn't have his own burden, who came to bear the burden of others. And since that person was not merely a human being, but God in the flesh, his death was of infinite value and therefore sufficient to save all who believe in him, mm-hmm. including those who, like Salmon Player and Aladdin, have been resisting him with the most absurd logic. He even died to save people from those sorts of sins, intellectual sins, as well as, sins of, immorality like their prophet committed, sexually immoral things and so forth.
Check this out. So Salmon Player says, Jesus, mankind, so he can die for them. Makes perfect sense. I'm guessing you just left out a word like entered creation or something like that. But think about this, Salmon Player, because I find that Muslims never really grasp the problem that Anthony was just pointing out. Right? You've got a God. You don't. I mean, in Christianity, you've got a God who is perfect. And since he's perfect, he is also perfect in his attributes. Perfect justice would mean that all sin gets punished. If at the end of time there's any sin that hasn't been punished, then the justice has not been perfect. At the same time, try to imagine what perfect love or perfect mercy would be like. Well, notice those attributes would be calling for different things. Mercy would be calling for, hey, forgive this person. Justice would be calling for punishment. So perfect attributes calling for different things presents a problem when that sort of being encounters sinful human beings, right? Human beings who sin, right? So notice, justice is calling for us to be punished. Mercy is calling for us to be forgiven. What does a God like that do? Does he just punish us? Well, that would be just, but it wouldn't be merciful. Does he forgive our sins? Well, if he does, then that would be merciful, but it wouldn't be just. So how do you reconcile this with your theology? Well, Christianity and Islam have very different ways of dealing with this problem. You could call it the problem of sin, right? In Islam, the solution to the problem of sin is to reduce and diminish God's attributes so that Allah just isn't very loving, right? Allah only loves you if you first love him. If you love Allah and you serve him, then he might love you in return. But you start the love there. Notice this kind of love that Allah has is the same kind of love that Jesus condemned in Matthew chapter 5, right? Jesus says, if you only love those who love you, what are you doing more than pagans and tax collectors, right? You're doing the same thing that anyone would do. That's the greatest love that your God has, right? So on the one hand, God's love is diminished to where Allah is about as loving as, any random person that you might find. In fact, Allah's love is significantly less than most people that I know, right? Because most people I know do love other people, do love people who disagree with them, right? Allah doesn't. So Allah's love is weak and defective. And not only that, but his justice is defective. Allah can just let sin slide, so his justice certainly isn't perfect. But then if some sin is really bothering him, he can just make someone else pay for those sins and can just pile the sins that you've committed on me or Anthony, right? Keep in mind, your God says he's going to do that, right? Through his prophet, he declared he is going to do that. He's going to take your sins, salmon player, and make me and Anthony pay for them in hell, right? So his justice is massively skewed, and you don't see any problem with this, right? So keep in mind, in Christianity, you've got, and notice, I think you could spot the true religion here just by examining theology and not even going to history or all the other areas that we normally go to. Just look at your concept of God. In order for you, salmon player, to have forgiveness, you have to believe in a God who is massively weak and defective, whose attributes fall vastly short, whose attributes are even lower and weaker than those of human beings, right? That's the kind of God you have to believe in so that you can believe that you could be forgiven in spite of the things that you've done. That's probably the real reason you don't ever want to have to deal with the God of Christianity, whose justice is perfect, whose mercy is perfect, whose love is perfect. You can't deal with those kinds of attributes because you don't understand how you can be forgiven. Now just think about this. If a being is actually perfect in justice, that means that he's going to have to punish all sins. If his love and mercy are perfect, that means he wants to forgive human beings. What does that mean? It means that somehow he has to punish the sins and has to show love and forgive the sinners. How in the name of common sense is that going to happen? We have no idea. We can't even comprehend how God's going to do that, but he showed us. He showed us by entering creation, dying on the cross for our sins, and announcing that that is how we can be forgiven. And you sit here mocking it. You sit here mocking it. And you tell us we'd better go with your weak and defective and impotent God and believe in him and his silly little attributes that fall short of even human beings, and that Jesus condemned. That's the God we have to believe in. And don't believe in our God with perfect attributes. Don't do that, because it sounds weird to you. Of course, ladies and gentlemen, of course, God entering creation and dying on the cross sounds silly to Muslims when Muslims are thinking of God in terms of their own religion. Well, God doesn't need to do that. Our sins aren't that bad, and he doesn't really care all that much, and he certainly doesn't love us enough to do that sort of thing. Yes, I agree that the cross makes no sense given Islamic theology of the defective God. The God who falls short in every way. Of course it doesn't make sense. Start with a Christian concept of God and you'll start seeing why we believe in the cross.
Let me throw in a couple of verses here that speak right to what you were just saying. And you'll recognize these, but every Christian should know them, and Muslims need to hear them at some point. But in Psalm 85, this is one of the Psalms. So the Quran itself actually makes reference to the Psalms, right? The Zabur. But here's what it says in Psalm 85:10. Mercy, so God withholding wrath from those who justly deserve it. Mercy and truth. So in truth, these people would deserve wrath, right? But mercy calls for God to restrain his wrath. Truth calls for God to exert it. But here, rather than pit these two things against each other, the psalmist says, mercy and truth have met together, righteousness or justice and peace have kissed. So here, in the context of the psalm, it's talking about God saving his people who deserve his wrath and displeasure. And so the psalmist is saying that somehow, remarkably, God is able to be merciful to us while still maintaining his truth, justice, and righteousness. And all of this looks ahead, of course, to the cross of Christ, which is what all of the Old Testament prophets are really pointing to. They're driving people to see that God in his holiness and justice requires he has to exert his wrath against sin, but he's promising to save, and he's revealing to them the way that he's going to do that, which ultimately is fulfilled in the person of Christ. But you come to Romans chapter 3, where Paul is talking about how God justifies the ungodly. To justify means to declare righteous. And he tells us that God does so by laying the burden of our sins on Christ, who pays for them willingly. He's a willing sacrifice, and in turn giving us Christ's righteousness. And then Paul ends in Romans 3, verse 26 by saying that God did this so that he might be both just and the justifier of those who believe in Jesus. In other words, so that he might be both just and merciful. Just in punishing our sins and not just skirting them or sweeping them under the rug, and merciful in declaring us righteous because Christ lived a perfect life in our place.
Amen. All right, well, we'll probably wrap this up around 9:30 because that'll be a good 90 minutes. But let's go ahead and watch this last clip here.
Uh-oh. What more can you say?
Yusuf Estes giving us more knowledge of the origins of Christianity and the Catholic Church. So here we go. Last clip from Yusuf Estes. And everyone pay attention because running out of time. We can't keep playing this one over again. All right. See if you're ready to accept Islam.
Now, if you understand that and you go to their website and read, they didn't even take over Christianity until the year 325 AD. And when they did, they changed a lot of things, again, referring to their own website. But if you want to check it in Britannica or Americana or grow your encyclopedias, go ahead and read about the Catholic Church. When, in August of 325 AD, at the Nicaea Council, they took over, first thing they said was, let's change the date of the birth of Jesus to be the same date as that of Mithras, which was the god, one of the gods worshipped there, and also the sun god's birthday was the same day, December the 25th, believing it to be the shortest day of the year. And Constantine was a sun worshiper of Sol Invictus. Go to the website, read it for yourself.
All right, so did you catch that, Anthony?
Yeah, I wish I didn't, but I did.
All right, so the Catholic Church, which was started 3 centuries before Christ by Alexander the Great in Rome, took over the Roman Empire so that you couldn't be a Roman citizen without being a Catholic, then somehow was at odds with Judaism and Christianity for more than 2 centuries. Again, we're talking before Christ here. But then finally took over Christianity at the Council of Nicaea in 325. That's when they took over Christianity and changed the date for the birth of Jesus to line up with the birth of Mithras. And there you go. And he refers to Constantine there, so he clearly wasn't confusing Constantine with Alexander the Great. So did you get all that?
Yeah, so many crazy things there that just don't even work.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing is, a lot of people don't know this, the Council of Nicaea, the vast majority of bishops at the council were from the East. Mm-hmm. They're not from Rome. I think there were only 2 bishops that were representing the Roman Church. Even the Pope at the time wasn't there, right? So Nicaea, I mean, where is this Catholic Church that's now taking over?
Yeah, from outside, it's coming in and taking over.
Where is this thing? There were no representatives of this church present at that council, and there were only 2 bishops from the Roman See. It's just really weird hearing all this sort of stuff, and then the whole thing about Mithras and all that.
Yeah,
I was telling.
Yeah, notice, I mean, he's saying this is on their websites and so on, right? This is go to
Encyclopedia Britannica, and he listed a whole bunch of things.
Yeah, so everyone, I want a little homework assignment. Go to these encyclopedias and look up Catholic Church, and you're going to find that at the Council of Nicaea, the Catholic Church, which started again 3 centuries before Christ, was founded by Alexander the Great, but officially took over the Christian church, 325, and then decided to change the birth date of Christ to December 25th to match Mithras. And it's a little side note. It's a little side note here. How people actually came up with December 25th. It's actually weird, and I believe false, based on a false assumption. But in the early church, they had a belief that people who are sent from God are conceived on the same day of the year, the same day of the calendar that they die on, right? Now, I don't know how you could possibly defend that, but there was this belief, right? So, in other words, if you're some Old Testament prophet and you come into the world, the day you're conceived is the day of your death is going to be the same day that you're conceived, right? So how they put this together was they did their best to calculate the day of Jesus' crucifixion, right? They did the best to calculate the day of Jesus' crucifixion. And once they got that, they say, okay, well, that would be the same day of the year on which Jesus was conceived. Therefore, count 9 months forward. And so they concluded that Jesus was executed on March 25th. They counted 9 months forward, December 25th. That is very strange reasoning, very unfamiliar to us. Again, I think incorrect reasoning. But Yusuf Estes gives his explanation. Hey, we want to be on the same day as Mithras. Interesting stuff. All right. So, Anthony, are you persuaded by Yusuf here? And Muslims in the comment section, I don't see any Muslims defending him. I see them mainly trying to distract from the fact that their apologists are really, really horrible and complete liars who make things up. And again, we're not picking some random Muslim apologist off the street. We're not picking someone we found at a local mosque who's spouting complete nonsense. We're going to one of the most popular Muslim apologists on the planet, the one that Muslims send us to, saying, you would not say this to Yusuf Estes. You're all terrified of him. We go and we start looking at his clips, and this is what we find. We find absolute nonsense. Now, notice how this ties in. This keeps happening, ladies and gentlemen. This keeps happening. We examine the comments of Muslims in the chat. We examine the claims of Muslim apologists and debaters, and we find over and over again they just keep making stuff up. And why? You can see in the comments section why. Their own Muslims do not care and do not hold them accountable. And so it's a virtue in Islam to be a mighty deceiver. The better the deceiver you are, the more people you can lead astray by making up ridiculous claims. The more you can do that, the better. What do you think, Anthony? See you looking at comments over there.
Yeah. I mean, I think they're just on the rat wheel, right? They're just going to keep going round and round. They like their errors in many cases until they, wake up and think, no, we're more concerned with truth than we are with just maintaining the lie. I mean, what is it that keeps them holding on to Islam when it requires them to buy into things that are patently absurd and false, right? I mean, what's the benefit of that? I really don't get it. Right? Salmon player, Aladdin, what's the benefit of constantly misrepresenting what we're saying in response to you, in response to the crazy things you make up about Christianity? What's the benefit in either defending or refusing to rebuke and disagree with people like Yusuf Estes? What's the benefit in making bad arguments for Islam that we keep refuting and then repeating them the next time you come on here? I mean, I really don't see what the benefit of that is. Maybe you think that, I mean, when we talked about the issue of love, right, Allah in the Quran makes it clear that the only people that he's going to love are those who in some way merit his love, right? They're going to earn it in some way. And so maybe since Allah is portrayed as the best of deceivers, Surah 354 and 830, maybe you think this is one of those ways that you can get Allah to love you. Right? So maybe the more deceiving you are, the more pleased Allah will be because he's going to recognize in you the same qualities he boasts about in himself. I mean, I don't know. I just can't really wrap my head around what it is that keeps you guys doing some of these things that just don't make any sense to me.
Yeah, and as you point out, you just can't deny the fact that your theology impacts the adherents, right? If you're going around bragging about being the best of deceivers, which is what your God does, and you don't realize how that's going to impact your followers, you might want to take a closer look, because Allah constantly brags about how he's tricking and deceiving people. He's the best at it. And then Muslim apologists do the exact same thing. They see how many people they can trick and deceive, and then Muslims keep falling for it. And one of the sad thing here is if you're watching that clip, when it would go to the audience, there are Muslims there taking notes on this. They're sitting there taking notes. Oh, okay, so Catholic Church 3 centuries before Christ. Okay, Alexander the Great, yeah. And the sad part is that Muslim will then, he's got all his notes. He then goes out to his fellow Muslims and shares this. He then goes and talks to Christians and shares this information. And he's going to run into people who have no clue about the origins of Christianity and won't know any better, and he'll deceive them. So notice, Allah is the best of deceivers. He tricks and deceives people. Muslim apologists like Yusuf Estes goes out and tricks and deceives people. The Muslims in the audience think they're getting good information. They write it all down, but then they just go out and end up tricking and deceiving people. And then those people who convert, Islam will make them the next generation of apologists, and they'll continue the cycle. This is Islam, ladies and gentlemen. This is what we're being told is the true religion. Odd stuff. All right, Anthony, we should go ahead and close out. Any final thoughts here?
Yeah, just that Shamoun player says that Allah is a merciful creator, not a father. A father wouldn't let his children suffer. Well, what is the attribute of mercy? I mean, I could just as well say Allah can't be a merciful creator because a merciful creator wouldn't let his children suffer. Mm-hmm. That's not true according to Islam or Christianity, right? Mercy is precisely, the observation that man deserves punishment, and God can withhold punishment. But not at the expense of his justice, according to Christianity, only according to Islam. Mm-hmm. But anyways, we can go on rebuking and responding to Salmon Player. He doesn't apparently listen to anything we say, so yep. We'll just have to catch you next time, Salmon Player.
Yeah, we'll catch you. You'll keep coming back, Salmon Player. You can't stay away. You hear that David Wood, Anthony Rodgers, Sam Shamoun got something going down. You keep coming back, and we actually like having the Muslims here in the chat. One, because we do like to deal with objections. Two, because we hope that you actually pay attention and can be led out of darkness. But three, because you help give everyone here an education about the true nature of Islam and its impact on people. So we know you're doing that for us, and thank you, and we'll see you all again. Be going live again sometime this week.